So this rubber came off the other wheel, and you can see the old wire that's still in here. So the first thing I have to do is pull it out. So just take these vice grips. Sometimes they're harder than other times, so we will see how difficult it is to pull this one out. The other one came out pretty quickly, pretty easily, but we'll see how difficult. With this welt braze right here, being already the part that's out, it should be a little bit easier. That's coming out pretty well. So this is the old wire. Go right over here. Then I'm going to get my oil can. Squish, squish, squish. I've got this whole rubber is pretty pretty laid out flat. I'm gonna put the oil can in here. 1, 2, 3. Let that go through. 1, 2, 3 into the.
Oh my God.
So now I'm gonna place some oil all around the channel, just a light squeeze through here. Make sure I get a bead across the entire thing, all the way around, because while the carriage is spinning, the rubber will actually spin along it as well. Then I'll take a rag, just so I can kind of spread it, coating the entire thing, the entire panel there. Next step, if you look right here, you'll see these little fellows that actually help hold the wheels together. Those wheel hubs there. And we'll take it and we'll place it up here on the rubber machine so that it's centered right on there. You'll notice I've had this hanging up just on the machine so that the oil is gravity going down, so it'll coat the entire inside of the wheels there. If you could see those two holes. And then I'm going to lay this out. I'll grab 2 wires here. And then I'll put 1 wire in. Then I'll take the second wire, put it into the other side. And then I'll just slide them in. This is probably so far the easiest that I've ever had wires go in. And I'll watch down towards the end down there. And I'll keep pushing through until I've got about 3 to 4 inches on each side. And then I like to offset them just a little bit. So when I come back to do my brazes, I have a little bit of room to work. About 3. About 4. Then we'll come over here. You see how it makes that little T shape with the root there on the bottom. These old wires from the last wheel. And then we'll set this so that it's a little bit wider. And place these through these 2 holes right here. And you can actually see them a little bit better on this side, but it's a little finesse and a little wiggling around in there. I'll tighten up this nut just to clamp down a little bit, but I'm going to leave this down for just a second. I just had pulled this back a little bit more so that I had some extra room to send. So that I can have both of them just off center from the machine. I'll tighten this up again. then 15th, 16th nut. And there's just a little bit of a fill. You see there's just that little bit of resistance. So now I'll push that up and that will clamp these so that they don't go anywhere. So now the next step is to get the rest of the machine brought over. And you'll see we've got these two little plates here. And if you look into these jaws, they actually have the holes for the channel, for the cables to go through. We'll put that right on there with this arm down. And what happens is when you apply this arm, it tightens those up. We'll put this 15/16 on, just so it's there. Then we'll back off just a little bit so I have room to wiggle around and make those holes the right length. Now we'll come through here, and I've still got the root facing down of the T. Sometimes you just loosen it up so that you can spread the jaws a little bit more. And I'll tighten it up some. Then I'm going to spread the jaws apart from each other. And what that does is it changes the height of these holes right in here. And these holes right here. So I've got one of them through. It's just a little finagling, messing with it. As long as they're through, now I can come back over to the big wheel, bring it all the way down. Same with the small wheel. You'll see these threads, and as I back off, you'll notice that they come lower, because we're going to need as much length as we can manage to get to pull these all the way through. Now if you come back over here, you'll see jaws on there. You'll see jaws on these teeth on there, and when you bring the wires into it, the wires will actually catch those teeth. And each of these clamps grabs a different wire. So this clamp on here is going to bring the outside of the wheel rubber, which this one, and then this one, if you look at it from top, you'll notice that it's lined up further over where I'm standing to my right, and so that'll bring the inside cable. So this one, once I've made it past there, can actually just be bent up a little bit, and then this one can also be pushed up through there. And then I will push these I'll go ahead and bend these for now. And I'll push it as far as I can just by hand. Because that's slightly less work. Do that than trying to. Now at this point, I'll start bringing the wheel out. So I've pulled the wheel out over here so that it's lined up with the jaws. Do it like you're looking at what I'm pointing at. So I've got the wheel, the channel lined up with those jaws, and I'll come up to this one, and I'll raise. As I spin this, it raises this bar up here so that it's a little bit closer. And this rubber right here starts setting it inside of the channel. And it's just starting to go in there. I can just kind of feel the gap where the top of the T sits on flush on top of there. I'll do a little bit more. There's just a little bit of a feel to it. It's a slight resistance and then back a little bit. Now, I'll take the hammer and I'll make sure these wires are lined up in the clamps. Kind of bang down on it a little bit so that it's closed up. And this is where every machine is a little bit different and they each have their own feel to them. This one in particular, the teeth on the clamps are kind of wore out and old. So you also kind of have to push down on it. And as you spin the big wheel, it'll actually pull both of these clamps up. And you want to make sure, if you look in through here where these bends are, that the bends are actually moving together. And you'll notice right here, this is still down, so the jaws are closed on around it so the wires aren't falling out, but it still lets the wires get pulled through the rubber. And we'll just watch these as we spin it to make sure that both wires are being pulled together. If you stand back, you can look and see that as I do this, the rubber is actually getting pulled up around the wheel. It gets shorter and shorter as it pulls in. And I'll bring it to the very top of it here. While those are still holding it, I come over here and I clamp there so that it's tight and it'll prevent the wires from sliding back. I want it a little bit tighter than that. You see how easy that comes through. So I'll tighten this 15/16 just a little bit. That's a little too much pressure, so I'll back up. Still a little too much pressure. Back up just about 1/8 of a turn. And I'll do it 1/8 of a turn until I can get it up there. Some of the bigger guys could do that a lot easier than me, but I'm pretty small. So that should be good for holding that to prevent the wires. That should be good to prevent the wires from falling back out. As I come back over here and I release these clamps off of the wires, and I'll spin back this off, and you'll see that the wires themselves aren't actually pulling out right now, which is what I want to make sure is happening, because sometimes you'll do that. and you'll see them start sliding backwards. And then you have to start back in. And I'll bring it right up here so I have as much space for working as I can. Bring these clamps back around. Push that just so they're as far down as I can have them and have as much space for working. I'll come through. I'll line up this wire again. Make sure that one's lined up. Bend again. Hammer. Tap them down so that they're gripping those wires really well. And then make sure they're still not coming back out. Back up just a little bit now that these are clamped on there. And then we'll go again. So we are still watching this to make sure that it's setting into the channel on the wheel. Now as I do this, I'm still watching, just moving back and forth to make sure that everything's moving together and everything's setting in, and filling around to make sure. So if you come look over here, you'll see that it's gotten a little bit wonky and it's not setting on top of the channel. So I'll see it's a little bit too tight for me to just pull it loose. So I'll back off just a little bit to loosen it. And the tension will actually pull the wires back a little bit as well. And then I can sort of reset it all. And you'll notice that this is a little bit wonky, so that outside rubber is tighter than the inside rubber. So to adjust for that, we'll come to this small wheel back here that will pull just this one. You see I turn the small wheel, it pulls just this one, which tightens that one wire, which is actually the wrong side. So one way that I can adjust that is if I loosen up on this one and I pull just this one big wheel, even though it's bringing both of them up, it's only pulling the one wire because the clamp is not down on that wire. So that will only tighten this one side until it's slightly more even. And again, filling around, I noticed that it's a little bit off that back over here, and so it's twisted around some in all the different spots. So I'll come back and I'll close this one up, and that will pull both of them together again. I'll push down on there, and I've turned the big wheel, it brings both of them. And again, still just filling around to make sure things are setting in there correctly. And everything's moving together as evenly as I can have it. And so again, back over here on the inside of the wheel, it's setting pretty well, but on the outside, there's a few gaps, and you can see them over here. If you look, you'll see that the gap for the top of the T on the rubber, there's a space right here. And it does that around several different spots in the whole, around the whole wheel. See, right around through there. So again, I'll come back over to the small wheel in this lower one, that covers the outside part of the outside wire, and I'll only tighten it. And as I tighten it, the only side that will be moving is just the outside for the small wheel. And I'll continue filling around. And then a little bit tighter.
70.
Just my blood sugar is probably just a little bit low. Now I want the whole wheel, the entire rubber to be a little bit tighter. So not a whole lot. Because you also don't want it too tight where the wires are actually, there's too much tension on the wires. And if you come listen in, as I tap them, you can hear the difference in the tone on them. So that means this outside, because it's a higher pitch, this outside wire is a little bit tighter than the inside wire. And I'll back off just a little bit. And a lot of it is just feel and practice and having someone that knows what they're doing, showing you how things feel and how things sound. So if you come in and listen again, you can really hear that the tings are a lot more similar, and I'm tone deaf. So that it's a little bit closer. And they're not going to be exactly the same because the rubber itself is old and twisted and worn out in different ways. Because I'm reusing the rubber, it's a little bit cheaper. But everything is on there very tightly. And it's not going to just come off at that tightness. But it's also not so tight that the wires will actually break. Until it gets twisted in a track or a curb, or the wheel actually twisting as the horse turns without any forward or backward movement. So we'll come back up here, tighten that. I want it a little bit tighter. Sometimes on this machine, it'll actually slip back if you don't tighten it. So I always come back and crank down just a little bit more, just to give it that extra assuredness that it's not going anywhere. So the next thing I like to do, again, to make sure that I have in fact got these tight, because this is where I've made a lot of mistakes over the past few years doing these wheels. I will get too quick to snip the wires, and that's when that all goes out and you pretty much are unable to get them back in. So before I actually cut the wires, I come back and we'll loosen these to make sure that I can make these loose without the wires pulling back out. So I'll watch both of these for just a moment to make sure they're not sliding back. It's kind of hard to see without some kind of background. So I'll put my hand up there and just watch for a second. Watch for a second to make sure that the wires aren't sliding back out. There is a lot of tension right there. So if it is going to start sliding back at this point, because this jaw is not doing its job, then they would already be sliding backwards. Okay, so the next step here is to take your bolt cutters, and again, I like to spread these jaws just a little bit, and then take here. Again, I like to if you look in through there, you can see that they're offset just a little bit, so I can cut them at different lengths if you look from above. And you can see that the two wires have different lengths where they're at inside of there. It'll be a little bit more noticeable once I actually come back and cut, but I can cut one right over here. And then I can cut another one right back here. And that gives me different working angles so that I'm not keeping the heat for the next step. I'm not keeping the heat in one central spot. I can kind of stagger it and move back and forth. I'll pull these old wire scraps off here to the side. We'll get to the next step. So, the next step, ready? Yeah. Okay, so the next step here is getting our gas ready. We'll go ahead and pull a brazing rod. We'll open up the gas. So we'll open up the gas here. You've got your oxygen and your acetylene. This is the oxygen, this is the acetylene. We'll open that up. We'll open up the pressure. You can see the pressure gauge moves out right here. And again on this side. And then over here we've got the acetylene. You see the oxygen or the pressure gauge for the acetylene comes up. So we've got pressure in both the oxygen and the acetylene. I'll open up both until I can hear them. And then I'll close them, but not tightly closed. Because what happens is when you go to light it and you get that little poof of the pressure that's right there, you'll actually put too much oxygen into the mixture. You'll put too much oxygen into the mixture and it'll blow itself out. So I went from being completely closed to open, and then just barely closed, and then open, just barely closed, and then open back up on the gas. And I'll close this. And you can see I almost just barely blew it out. And I just won't, just barely have that blue flame. Doesn't have to be loud, doesn't have to be heavy, otherwise you will melt through it. And this is something that you want to practice with scrap metal and doing, so that you learn how not to melt the rods. I'm going to take my hammer here and come right on in and start heating up this top one. And again, I'm not wanting to cut, and that's why I don't have a thick, loud, heavy flame either. I'm just trying to just trying to make it warm enough that it's a little bit more malleable. It's glowing orange. It is hot. And I put that tip too close and hit everything and knocked out the flame, so I did have to start over with the flame. So I just got a little bit too close to everything. Then I'm going to move over here to the other side while that one cools off a little bit. As I do this, just tapping everything so that it's all lined up a little bit better. This is just practice and doing a good job or not a good job. And this is not a great job. I'm not going to win any awards, but it is going to hold by the time I'm done with it. I'll make it a little bit hotter. Make sure I fill it in. So that there's a good connection there. Want a good connection on this one. And I can turn it off. So now that I've given those wires time to cool off, it's about 30 minutes or to an hour, I'm going to go ahead and release this brace. And then I can also release this brace and come back with the wrench and loosen everything up. And I can actually just pull this one off. Set it back. Put all your tools back where they go. And then I can use this top wheel to lower it back down. And start wiggling that. and it pops right on out. So the next step after I've got the wheel off of the actual machine is, you'll notice there's a gap right here from where it was at. Now this rubber is actually compressed, which is what the machine was doing to the rubber as it pulled those wires through. So the next step here is going to be to close up that gap. Now they do make an actual machine that will pull the rubber closed for you, but when you don't have that machine, there's other ways of doing it. Most famously is where you'll actually place the gap down on the ground, pick it up, and then kind of throw and twist. And as you do that, the gap will pull closed. You can see it.